ਆਈਸਿਸ ਦੀ ਸਮੱਸਿਆ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਦਿਨ-ਬ-ਦਿਨ ਵੱਧਦੀ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਮਨਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਡਰ ਸਾਫ਼ ਦੇਖਣ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ। ਪਿਛਲੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਸਮੇਂ ਤੋਂ ਇਹ ਸਮੱਸਿਆ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਮੁਲਕ ਦੀ ਲੱਗਦੀ ਸੀ, ਪਰ ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਅੰਦਰੂਨੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਬਣ ਚੁੱਕੀ ਹੈ। ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਸੈਨ ਬਰਨਾਰਡੀਨੋ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਈਸਿਸ ਵੱਲ ਝੁਕਾਅ ਰੱਖਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਕੁਝ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਗੋਲੀਆਂ ਦੀ ਬਰਸਾਤ ਕਰਕੇ 14 ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੌਤ ਦੇ ਘਾਟ ਉਤਾਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਅਤੇ 17 ਗੰਭੀਰ ਜ਼ਖਮੀ ਹੋਏ। ਇਸੇ ਦੇ ਸਬੰਧ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੀਤੀ ਰਾਤ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਬਰਾਕ ਓਬਾਮਾ ਨੇ ਓਵਲ ਆਫਿਸ ਤੋਂ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਨੂੰ ਐਡਰੈਸ ਕਰਦਿਆਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਐਡਮਿਨਿਸਟ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਆਈਸਿਸ ਦੀ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਨਾਲ ਡੀਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਗਨ ਲਾਜ਼ ਵੱਲ ਧਿਆਨ ਦੇਣਾ ਹੋਵੇਗਾ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਆਏ ਦਿਨ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਗਨ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ ਵੀ ਵੱਧ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਹੋਰ ਵਧੇਰੇ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਲਈ ਆਓ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਖਾਸ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ।
President Obama addressed the country yesterday because of a fear from terrorism, which has only been increasing in the United States over the past few years. This statement has a trickle effect from Paris and California's San Bernardino shootings, which killed many innocent people.
Good evening. On Wednesday, 14 Americans were killed as they came together to celebrate the holidays. They were taken from family and friends who loved them deeply. They were white and black, Latino and Asian, immigrants and American-born, moms and dads, daughters and sons. Each of them served their fellow citizens, and all of them were part of our American family. Tonight I want to talk with you about this tragedy, the broader threat of terrorism, and how we can keep our country safe. The FBI is still gathering the facts about what happened in San Bernardino, but here's what we know. The victims were brutally murdered and injured by one of their co-workers and his wife. So far, we have no evidence that the killers were directed by a terrorist organization overseas or that they were part of a broader conspiracy here at home. But it is clear that the two of them had gone down the dark path of radicalization, embracing a perverted interpretation of Islam that calls for war against America and the West. They had stockpiled assault weapons, ammunition, and pipe bombs. So this was an act of terrorism designed to kill innocent people.
President Obama ਨੇ ਮੰਨਿਆ ਕਿ ਆਈਸਿਸ ਦਾ ਜਾਲ ਪੂਰੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੱਧ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਦਿਲਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਡਰ ਪੈਦਾ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਧਿਆਨ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਨੂੰ ਐਡਰੈਸ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਕਦਮ ਲਿੱਤਾ। ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਟੈਰਰਿਜ਼ਮ ਨੂੰ 9/11 ਤੋਂ ਅੱਜ ਤੱਕ ਫੇਸ ਕਰਦਾ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ। Terrorism has been in America for a while and always comes up in many different ways in front of the American people. To tackle this issue, President Obama has asked Congress to make a few changes which include gun laws and policies in America, and he even went further and laid out the steps on how Congress can implement these changes.
Here at home, we have to work together to address the challenge. There are several steps that Congress should take right away. To begin with, Congress should act to make sure no one on a no-fly list is able to buy a gun. What could possibly be the argument for allowing a terrorist suspect to buy a semi-automatic weapon? This is a matter of national security. We also need to make it harder for people to buy powerful assault weapons, like the ones that were used in San Bernardino. I know there are some who reject any gun safety measures. But the fact is that our intelligence and law enforcement agencies, no matter how effective they are, cannot identify every would-be mass shooter, whether that individual is motivated by ISIL or some other hateful ideology. What we can do, and must do, is make it harder for them to kill. Next, we should put in place stronger screening for those who come to America without a visa, so that we can take a hard look at whether they've traveled to war zones. And we're working with members of both parties in Congress to do exactly that. Finally, if Congress believes, as I do, that we are at war with ISIL, it should go ahead and vote to authorize the continued use of military force against these terrorists. For over a year, I have ordered our military to take thousands of airstrikes against ISIL targets. I think it's time for Congress to vote to demonstrate that the American people are united and committed to this fight.
When we think of Muslims, this notion of terrorist arises. But we forget that these misconceptions hurt us more than they do good. All Muslims are not terrorists, and we need to remember that.
Let me now say a word about what we should not do. We should not be drawn once more into a long and costly ground war in Iraq or Syria. That's what groups like ISIL want. They know they can't defeat us on the battlefield. ISIL fighters were part of the insurgency that we faced in Iraq. But they also know that if we occupy foreign lands, they can maintain insurgencies for years, killing thousands of our troops, draining our resources, and using our presence to draw new recruits. The strategy that we are using now, airstrikes, special forces, and working with local forces who are fighting to regain control of their own country, that is how we'll achieve a more sustainable victory. And it won't require us sending a new generation of Americans overseas to fight and die for another decade on foreign soil. Here's what else we cannot do. We cannot turn against one another by letting this fight be defined as a war between America and Islam. That, too, is what groups like ISIL want. ISIL does not speak for Islam. They are thugs and killers, part of a cult of death. And they account for a tiny fraction of more than 1 billion Muslims around the world, including millions of patriotic Muslim Americans who reject their hateful ideology. Moreover, the vast majority of terrorist victims around the world are Muslim. If we're to succeed in defeating terrorism, we must enlist Muslim communities as some of our strongest allies, rather than push them away through suspicion and hate. That does not mean denying the fact that an extremist ideology has spread within some Muslim communities. There's a real problem that Muslims must confront without excuse. Muslim leaders here and around the globe have to continue working with us to decisively and unequivocally reject the hateful ideology that groups like ISIL and al-Qaeda promote, to speak out against not just acts of violence, but also those interpretations of Islam that are incompatible with the values of religious tolerance, mutual respect, and human dignity. But just as it is the responsibility of Muslims around the world to root out misguided ideas that lead to radicalization, it is the responsibility of all Americans, of every faith, to reject discrimination. It is our responsibility to reject religious tests on who we admit into this country. It's our responsibility to reject proposals that Muslim Americans should somehow be treated differently. Because when we travel down that road, we lose. That kind of divisiveness, that betrayal of our values, plays into the hands of groups like ISIL. Muslim Americans are our friends and our neighbors, our co-workers, our sports heroes. And yes, they are our men and women in uniform who are willing to die in defense of our country. We have to remember that.
President Obama saw the importance of this fear and addressed the country from the Oval Office. ਜਦੋਂ ਦੇ Obama president ਬਣੇ ਹੈ, ਇਹ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਤੀਜਾ address ਸੀ Oval Office ਤੋਂ. Here in America, many of us felt we did not need to worry about ISIS threats, but it seems that we do. ISIS started in the Middle East and has been spreading rapidly throughout Europe and the United States. ISIS is a terrorist group that follows an Islamic ultra-fundamentalist ideology and considers itself at war with all nations and with all people who are not true Muslims. They kill, rape, torture innocent people, and use religion to justify what they are doing is correct. And they state that any person who is not a Muslim is a kafir. Many people in the world cannot tell the difference between Muslims and other minorities. This includes Sikhs being targeted. If you or anyone is subject to any harmful acts, please contact the Sikh Coalition, United Sikhs, or SALDAF. Almost all Republican candidates have made negative statements about President Obama's address yesterday, and yes, Trump being in the forefront. But the Democratic candidates have yet to respond. Prabjot Gaur, TV84, New York.